Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Wareham Planning Board meeting for May 2nd, 2022. This time, we'll open the meeting and take roll call. Mike Baptiste?
You want a response? Yeah,
Are you with us, Mike?
I'm here, present.
Okay, good. Jane Gleason?
Here.
Kyle Schultz?
Here.
Sam Corbett?
Here.
And the chair, myself, is here. Sherry Quirk is absent. Tonight, we're here for the continued public hearing for 36-21 modification to a special permit site plan review, Bay Point Club LLC Phase 4, 19 Bay Point Drive, map 9, lots 1004B and 1004A-1-7, new 8-unit townhouse buildings. I see that the proponent is here to speak to the project, so welcome.
Good afternoon, good evening, and on behalf of the development team, we would really like to thank each of you for making the time this evening to be available for a meeting dedicated to the Bay Point Club. This evening we have Chris Henderson, our lead architect, Bill Rosa, principal and partner at Win & Win, is our legal counsel, Tom Principe and Karen Beck from Principe, the design firm, myself, and Chris Reynolds, running a bit late, but I'm sure he'll be sliding in on, is he here? Yeah. Oh, he's here. And Chris Henderson, Chris Reynolds from Stone Street Corporation. So we're going to be pretty efficient with our time this evening because we know it's valuable to everyone. But I thought I would take a little bit of time myself and kind of walk through the history of the Bay Point Club and go in sequence as time goes on as to physically where things are, where the pump station is, where some of the sewer conversation lines are, and give everyone a non-technical sense as to the overall development, and then we'll go into the technical side. So everything I say lacks technical exactness, and our team will go through the development plan with certainty. So in 1964, the current Bay Point Club was designed by Jeffrey Cornish and came onto the market as Wareham Country Club. And some time went by, and in 1981, the property was transferred to Weedick, which was a quasi-public town of Wareham entity. In 1987, Weedick sold the property to Four Pines Development. And at that time, none of this was here. So the entire property was all Wareham Country Club and a golf course. Oop, thank you. Four Points Development Company developed the Bay Point Village Association and ran into some difficulty, and in 1991 transferred the property to BPG Corporation. None of these names mean anything. I'm not trying to be technical with names on deeds. I'm just giving you a sense as to the travel of the property. In 1993, this property was financed by Bay Bank, a now defunct entity. And Bay Bank restructured it and brought Weedick back in, and for whatever reason, and I don't know the details of it, again, not important, took the 7 acres and transferred that to Weedick. Successor in interest was the CEDA entity, Community Economic Development Authority. So from 1993 forward, we've got the failed development of Bay Point Village at that time. Very successful now. I'm saying that by point of reference and time frame. And Wareham Economic Development Corporation owning this 7 acres. With that were a series of easements that ran between the golf course and Weedick, and between the golf course and Bay Point Village. So that's the early stages of what was there. So from that, Bay Point Village, owned by the same entity that owned the golf course in 1989, put in a gravity line to the pump station that sits directly across from the Cedar property. 3 gravity lines go into this pump station. Gravity line from Bay Point Village, a gravity line from the clubhouse, and a gravity line from the pavilion building. Those 3 go in, and the 3 go out to a force main down by Lacasse on Onset Avenue. That makes sense? Does everyone have a point of reference as to what that is? The outline in red is the Cedar property. So as you roll the clock up a bit, in 2002, Buzzards Bay Golf, Inc. acquires the property, I think really from Baybank and its restructured deal from 97, 98. And then in 2006, they sell the property to MLG, which was Mark Gibson and his development group that the property went into foreclosure with Digital Credit Union, with Mark Gibson being the owner, MLG, in 2011, and we acquired the property in 2012. In 2011, from 2007 to 2011, the Gibson Group was advancing a plan for 40B housing. When we came in, there were plans everywhere for upwards of 260 40B housing units that apparently a development group called Minicelli was involved with. They were trying to advance that, and then it kind of collapsed on its own weight. So from 2012 to 2022, we have owned the golf course. We've improved the golf course, and we've been advancing our vision for the development. From the very beginning, we've been trying to acquire the Cedar property. As you pull into Bay Point Drive, the property is owned to the right by the town and to the left by the owners of the Bay Point Club. It's what's prevented us from being able to really do an entrance. The early part of the property that the town owns is zoned residential. The balance of the 7 acres is, we believe it's in the CR zone, although on a standalone basis, it would be a non-conforming use because it doesn't have 100 acres associated with it. So in addition to that, the Onset Water Department, the big water tower that you can see, has an underground line that goes out into neighborhoods and the water tower. So that's what was there when we arrived. Gravity line along the property. All this is Bay Point's property. We own all this. Down to the pump station across from the clubhouse. Gravity line from the clubhouse to the pump house. Gravity line from the pavilion to the pump house. Force main out onto Onset Road. Make sense? So this isn't exact, but most of it's exact. This is a couple of versions ago. There have been some minor changes. This is for illustration purposes. The number of buildings and units is correct. The number of units in phase 1 and phase 2 are correct. I was surprised when the Bay Point Village came to the meeting with certainty and said they owned the pump station. And they said I needed their permission to do what we were doing. And they said a few other things. So when I arrived in 2012, the Bay Point Village Association's president was a gentleman by the name of Richard Secker. Very nice man. He had an unexpected heart attack in 2017. We weren't here very long, and he invited me to his home, and then we went and we got a bite to eat, and he said, I have a problem. You own real estate that carries our effluent to this pump station. There was an agreement, verbal, over the years for sharing the expense of the pump station, but there was nothing in writing. And I said to Richard at the time, that makes no sense to me. We need to diligently search some records, because I can't imagine you'd do a development and not have easement rights down to exiting your effluent from your property. Pretty important issue, right? You got a problem. And the owner of this property says, oh, not so much, let's take that out. They have no sanitary sewer, water, discharge. So I had said to him, the way that you correct that is we'll do an easement document. And that easement document has to provide for us to be doing the development that at the time was contemplated. I wasn't in for approval. We knew that we wanted to do development. So he says, that would be great. So the two of us sit down and we, in short order, come up with the business side of that arrangement. And we draft an agreement. And the agreement is the title of it is Easement and Sewer Pump Station Agreement. And we did that in 2014. That agreement provides for a lot of different statements that were made that just aren't correct. Highlights of the agreement. The first whereas in the agreement. The Bay Point Club owns the building, the real estate, the buildings, and the equipment. First whereas in the agreement. I've submitted the agreement. I believe that you have it as part of the public record. Secondly, it provides a very specific track for approval. That we go in, we seek municipal approval, we get that municipal approval documented, and then we come back and we certify and demonstrate that there is no additional burden or cost associated with the Bay Point Village Association. We don't need their consent, we don't need their approval. It's in the document. It's in the document that I participated in drafting with Mr. Sacker. It's in the document that I suggested the Bay Point Village Association needs in the event I'm not here. It's in the document that I didn't charge them $1 for. Most developers would view that as a pretty unique opportunity. You need an easement. Gee, I need some money. Not $1, free of charge. We put the document together. I used in-house counsel. Bay Point Village Association used Marcus Emirates. MEEB is the entity's name. They're up in Braintree. They're a law firm that specializes in condominium development. Good group of people. I had used them on after 2014, I had used them on 2 other matters. I'm currently using them on a project up in Uxbridge. And when this issue came up, they said, look, the rules are pretty clear. It would be a conflict. You need to use someone else, to both parties. The first evening of testimony, it kind of sounded like I ran out and hired their attorney. And I took a little bit of offense to that because their attorney doesn't that attorney was never involved in this conversation from my perspective. That attorney conflicted themselves out because they had represented me on some other matters. So when we talk about the pump station, and we talk about who owns the pump station, there's not a lick of confusion. This pump station has always been part of the overall property. It has an easement granted to the Bay Point Village, and the first whereas in the agreement states that I own it. So I'd like to put that issue to bed. Our objective was to move quickly through this process because it's important for a lot of different reasons that we get the entrance and we get the clubhouse, which is now in the 2nd year of being closed, open. This has been and continues to be the front door to the Bay Point Club. And I need resolution to what we're doing with the Cedar property. So we took it upon ourselves to say, you know what, I can argue that, and I can win, because that's what the documents say. Do I want to have an argument at this planning board? Do I want to take that easement agreement and spend 3 of your valuable nights arguing over the merits of that agreement, or running to court, which is a whole different issue? So what we decided to do, which was done in pretty quick order, and it didn't look like it to you guys, or you collectively, because it just looked like we were extending, but the first 2 extensions, we redesigned a whole new pump station. And we did it on our own property. And these 52 units now come into a pump station here, and will have its own force line that will come up to the new phase 2 high point in the property, and then will gravity feed down to the new pump station. So what I thought was really a pretty positive, we're not going to have that argument. I'll deal with the Bay Point Village Association separately. We'll just do this on our own. I believe I have the right to tie into this. I believe that document tells me I have the right to tie into it. And I didn't want to wait a period of time to resolve that and adjudicate that in court. So now, our force main comes down the road, ties into the new pump station here. This force main from the existing pump station will stay in place to a point where we will then take it across the fairway into the new pump station, and we'll abandon the line from A Point to Onset Avenue. So we really now are not impacting at all Bay Point Village. It was a quick decision. It was an efficient solution, and it was pretty costly to us to continue this process and advance the approval of this property. So in the end, this is really the overall now of what started in 1964, went through a series of owners, 2 different bankruptcies. The town has been in and out a couple of times. There's a battery of easements by and between Bay Point and different owners of this property. And I think we have a great solution. I think we have a really good, solid development plan. That needs to go through the scrutiny of all of the engineering type review that it gets. So with that, that's the non-technical version of my overview. Does it make sense to everyone? Are there any questions? Are there? Yes, sir.
I do have one question, if I
Sure.
could. So, I mean, I love the idea of coming up with a Plan B to avoid a fight, obviously. That makes no sense. Nobody is gonna benefit from a fight. But what is the potential problem down the road if the Bay Point Village line that ties into, you're gonna abandon the line that goes out to Onset Ave, and you're gonna tie it into a new pump station owned by you, correct?
Correct? Already approved. It was
Right.
approved in phases 2 and 3.
But what happens now if that fails? Now they're kind of at the mercy of a pump station that's being maintained and controlled by somebody other than themselves, whereas right now, they're maintaining the existing pump station, correct?
We maintain it jointly.
Okay,
I have the clubhouse, the pavilion, phase 1, and the
so you don't
Bay
see
Point
any
Village
potential
Association.
conflicts some down?
All of this is coming down here. There's new lines feeding into that as well for phases 2 and phases 3, and it will be this. It's a substantial,
So the whole property would be adversely affected if that pump station failed?
across the board,
Yeah, okay.
yes. The entire property,
So
the
it-
pavilion, the clubhouse, the golf course, this
Phase
development
4.
here, that development, all across the
So
board.
it wouldn't be just the
It's not just
village
Bay
that would
Point
be
Village.
affected?
Correct. Correct. Now, I think that's a pretty comprehensive overview.
That was the only question that I had. Is anybody on the board?
Are you done with your?
Sure.
Okay, so I think you've addressed, at least so that I understand, the pump station issue. I have an understanding of it and I can process it. If we can move beyond the pump station.
Can I ask a question about the pump station?
Not yet, ma'am. The public hearing will be open for comment.
So, thank you. I think I have a grasp on that. There's a couple of other questions that have come before it, and maybe using that chart, you could answer them. There's a question about a sidewalk down to Onset Avenue. Is that part of your plan, and can you point to that?
Yes, so included in the phase 1, 2, and 3 approvals, previous approvals, the sidewalk comes down this side of Bay Point Drive. So the reason that you're not seeing it in this phase 4 plan is because it's already part of what we're required to do in previous phases. So once we determine where the road finally lands, right, through this process, this sidewalk will be constructed. So from that perspective, takes us to the next couple of points that I wanted to make.
Oh, I didn't want to get ahead of you. That's why I asked if you.
No, that's fine. That's where the sidewalk is. So as we complete this process, the Bay Point Club is going to acquire from the town of Wareham this 7.5 acres. When they acquire this 7.5 acres, it will then be merged with the balance of the real estate that the Bay Point Club owns. There's a couple of reasons to do that, including there's a lot of perpetual easements that ran between the Bay Point Club and prior owners for parking and different issues. All of the easements kind of collapse on their own weight. The grantor and the grantee will both be the Bay Point Club. And at that time, at that point, they no longer exist. So by doing that, there really won't be any property lines. The property line will be along the residential piece and up here. But everything along the road is privately owned. The Bay Point Club owns the road. So this acreage is gonna come in and be part of the Bay Point Club. Does that concept make sense?
Does that satisfy the 100 acres that you need for the development? That's, by doing that, that satisfies the question about not having 100 acres.
It's exactly what it does. That property now is 154 acres, so whatever the additional 7.5 acres gets to. So it no longer is a non-conforming, this stands alone at 7.5 acres in a CR zone. Okay, so, did I hit all the points?
Mr. Fay, a couple more questions. I like this chart, thank you. And I'm trying to bring forward questions that I've heard from the public.
Sure.
One other concern we've had, and I've been looking, the streetlight plan. I know you're planning to do some things with streetlights. Can you indicate on your
Can you
plan?
do that, Chris? Do you know where the streetlights are?
I mean, again, recognizing this is not the engineering diagram, but an approximate, you're gonna put streetlights
So
in,
there's a
right?
street light at Jetty, and then where's the,
At all the intersections. So at all in the zoning code, you require at all intersections there, and then at Starboard Drive, both sections of Starboard.
here and here?
Yep.
Here and here.
These will be normal,
So they're not stop and shop quality, light up the parking lot and try to land a plane at night, but there will be decorative streetlights that will light up a street at
at the intersection,
appropriate
yeah.
number of foot candles at those intersections, yes.
Okay.
Will there be one at the Bay Point Village, the village where it comes in as well? The extension, Bay Point Drive extension into Bay Point Drive for Cahoon?
Is there one scheduled to go there, Chris?
Repeat that question?
Is there one at the Bay Point Drive extension connection to Bay Point Drive or Cahoon?
I don't think so. Yeah, I'm not sure about that one. I don't know if there is.
Could there be if we
Say.
felt that that was required?
And these are hardwired streetlights, not solar powered.
So we have, these streetlights are not solar powered,
Those are gonna be hardwired.
yes.
Yep, okay. And, forgive me, because I don't remember the particulars of phase one. Does the covenant for the neighborhood require a post light at the end of each drive? Or
Does
no?
not require it, we have done that in several different instances.
Yeah, so it doesn't make for a dark street, the one, I'm just looking at phase one, and I see one street light for that whole area.
Correct. We do have some solar lights on posts,
Well, that was,
and there were no streetlights there before.
that was kind of the reason why I asked the question and why I was leading in that direction, was some of the concerns from the residents has been that the streets are dark, and that
Yeah.
the solar lights, especially after 2 or 3 cloudy days, do little or nothing to illuminate the street for safety. And especially where the sidewalk is not yet in place, that would kind of make for a dangerous situation, I would think.
Are you referring to up here, the sidewalk is in place? Or are you referring to down here?
Right.
Down here,
If someone's trying to get to Onset Ave,
right.
I mean, how long after, assuming that the project is approved and you acquire the 7 acres and you roll it in and everything moves forward, how long do you think it would take for the sidewalk to at least be in place, just in the name of public safety?
So we'd have to survey, locate where the road is, that then tells us where the sidewalk is. And that work in binder form would be done early, in finish coat form, because there's a lot of heavy trucks and activity that comes in and out during the development, building phase. The finished version would be towards the back side of this, but the early version would be sooner rather than later, after we get the appropriate survey data and work in road located.
60
So-
days, 120 days, 10 years?
So there would be a lot of utility work that has to be done first, because electric,
Yeah.
electric, gas, everything kind of runs through there. So as soon as that work would be done, then it could, sidewalks could go in, the binder coat could go in from the entrance, from that station 0 to 13.
So, as far as conditions of approval, that could be put at the top of the list. I mean, it's been, how long has it been since phase 1?
Well, all that's left is now, so now we finished the top coat towards the end of the season last year, and we need to clean up some landscaping on the sidewalks, clean up the sidewalks and install the light. That'll be done by June 30th of this year.
Okay. Okay, any other questions from the board before we move along to the next? I will.
Maybe another street light back at the,
At the extension?
yeah, at the extension. One more thing on street, will there be streetlights in phase 2, 3? We didn't talk down here.
Yes.
Just at that one intersection?
Here,
Here?
here,
Oh, and there, okay, thank you, at the intersections, okay, thank you.
yes, at the intersections.
And through you to Mr. Buckland, intersections is what the subdivision control requires, right, for streetlights?
The subdivision control requires streetlights at a certain distance, not just,
Not just at the intersections. So would we need additional ones in that long stretch there or not?
I don't,
I don't
if you had,
remember
if you had lights at the end of the driveways, I don't think you would need extra streetlights. It's a fairly low trafficked roadway. Not a lot of decision-making and interaction between vehicles and the road.
Okay, Mr. King, through you back to Mr. Fay. Did you say that you have post lights on the end of the driveways to those?
On some, yes.
On some.
We added that after, it wasn't part of a requirement. It was part of our landscape plan to do that.
Okay, so we'll have major streetlights and we'll have lighting along the street. Thank you.
Any other questions? You have any more to present?
We do.
Okay, go, please
So
move
I
forward.
get to sit down now as the least technical person, and now we can bring a new team up and would like to go through our answers to Mr. Rowley's letter and have that discussion. So Karen Beck from Tom Principe's office is going to take the lead on that. And Bill Rosa.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thanks, Janet.
We can share. Well, I only have the one, so if we can just kind of, I'll hand it off. So good evening. My name is Karen Beck. I'm with Principe Engineering. As you're more than likely aware, we have submitted multiple times to the town and been through the review process with Mr. Rowley. If you just take a look at the revision dates on the plans, you can see that we have made a tremendous effort to adapt the plans to the comments that have been made over the course of the hearings and the reviews, et cetera. I hopefully and can say that I believe we've finally gotten to the point where the comments from Mr. Rowley have been addressed. They're very minor comments. For the most part, they're typographical or additional pieces of information that in no way, shape, or form changes what this development will look like. The plans that you see in front of you this evening or were received by you back the beginning of April, those are the same plans that we're discussing this evening. And the changes that we would make to those plans in response to the comments that we received in late April from Mr. Rowley, again, are very, very minor. For the most part, I can go through those comments and responses. They're what is in front of you, his comment, and then our response in red. And then I'm also going to have some assistance from Mr. Rosa and Mr. Henderson in order to clarify a couple of the issues. So I'm not going to necessarily go through this process, comment 1, comment 2, comment 3. I'm going to skip around just a teensy bit. But for the most part, as I said, I think these comments are very minor and they do not result in any major changes to the plans that you've seen. The first comment had to do with distinguishing between the Cape Cod berm and pavers for buildings A, B, and C. Those are the buildings that have garages with driveways entering them. And for those buildings, we are not going to be using the Cape Cod berm adjacent or between the driveways because of the fact that we want the stormwater to flow into a treatment system. So the Cape Cod berms would prevent that. The distinguishment between the Cape Cod berm and the pavers is on the landscape detail sheet and has been there for quite some time. So the plans for the grading plan, et cetera, we have Cape Cod berm, we have pavers, and we have concrete curbing. So there's a lot of different curbing types that are proposed on the plans. It got very messy and complicated to try to differentiate them on the plan, and at one point we had discussed with Mr. Rowley being able to use color, and that offer was rejected. So the landscape plans were utilized in order to differentiate between the pavers and the Cape Cod berm because it was a cleaner sheet and was we were able to do that, and it's part of the landscape as far as we're concerned. As previously requested, labeled the width of each island for building C, D, E, and F. Actually, that again was a mistake made. We labeled 4 of the 5 buildings. We missed labeling 2 islands on one of the buildings, but they're all the same size width of islands, and they will all be labeled accordingly 4.5 feet. As previously requested, identify and show the location for each type of head wall to be used at pipe ends. Unidentified line work on landscape plans are not acceptable substitutes for the details required. The details for the head walls, there are only 2 types of head walls on the project. And there is only 1 head wall that is a double head wall. The majority of the head walls on the project are for single pipes. There's only 1 that's for a double pipe. So the detail for the double pipe head wall is labeled that it comes from catch basin number 5, and all the catch basins are labeled on the plans. So that 1 double head wall is clearly identified as to where it is and what it's to be used for, and all the rest of the head walls on the project are single head walls. And those details clearly indicate that. Retaining walls of undetermined height have now been included between buildings E and F and the drainage area. It is assumed that 4-foot-high picket fences, such as shown on sheet 18, apply to both of these new walls. Please clarify. I'm not sure where the confusion came from, because quite frankly, those walls are not unidentified in height. We provided cross-sections of those walls, just like we did for all the previous walls that had been shown on the plan. They indicate the height of the wall and the top of wall elevation and the bottom wall elevation for the entire length of all of the walls that are proposed on the project, and those were on the plans that were submitted in early April. In addition, the details of the fences clearly indicate, again, we've labeled where the retaining walls are and what type of fence. It's either going to be a picket fence because we don't need to screen, or it's going to be a screen fence because we are concerned about the view either towards the residents or away from the residents. And again, those details have always indicated how they apply to each particular retaining wall. The notation on sheet 5 relative to the crossing point for drainage and water should be placed on sheet 4 as well as sheet 5 for clarity. So basically the note was on the plan for the drainage. It wasn't on the plan for the water, so we've added it to that second plan. These sheets, he's referencing the landscape plans. These sheets are dedicated to landscape features around each building. It's our opinion that that's a statement and there isn't a response that's required. As previously requested, the location of multiple downspouts are now shown as unidentified black dots for each building. A detail of a typical downspout is shown on sheet 18 of the plan set. Actually, it's not unidentified black dots. They're actually referenced on the landscape plans because that's how we indicate where the downspout travels to and how we're handling the flows from those. But again, it was predominantly a statement, so we didn't feel that there was a response that was required. The location and type of downspout should be cause for concern, being so close to the foundation walls. It is better to carry downspouts away from foundations to prevent weeping of runoff to the interior of the walls. Bedding for downspouts, as shown, consist of crushed stone. It is our opinion, quite frankly, that we've made, this has been a repeated comment by Mr. Rowley, and we've made several changes to the plans in order to address those. We have a downspout detail. We show where it discharges to. We have a stone trench that the downspout discharges to, and all of the grades along in the front of the buildings and the rear of the buildings have slopes associated with them. So not only are we encouraging the stormwater to infiltrate into the ground via the use of the stone trench, I would point out too that the soils in this particular development are sands for the most part that have very good infiltration capacity. That's not always the case, obviously, in the wintertime when the ground freezes, but that's why we have the stone trenches and the grades as shown on the project. So we believe we have done a significant amount of work to make sure that there is no problem with water running along the facades of the foundation or getting trapped onto sidewalks or causing freezing in any way, shape, or form.
Excuse me, could you point me to the sheet or diagram that you references what you were speaking to?
actually sheet 18 of 18, so the very last sheet, of course. And there is several details that are involved here. So the typical driveway stormwater trench cross-section, that's between the driveways on the backside of 3 of the buildings. So the downspouts discharge to this gravel trench in that instance. Here are the downspouts, and again, they're shown on the landscape plans with a dark spot that is labeled on the landscape plans. And this goes to the stormwater trench for the downspouts. And then the trench itself is the typical downspout erosion protection, where we've got a minimum depth of 8 inches in depth, 8 inches wide, and a minimum of 3 feet in length. But that trench length could actually be increased, because basically what we indicated was 3 feet was the minimum. And if the wood mulch area for the landscape adjacent to the building is longer than 3 feet, we would increase the distance of the trench as well, so that we wouldn't have any erosion through the wood chip mulch. So all of those areas there is much above and beyond what is typical for a standard residence. We believe that we've done a really good job to make sure that it's not gonna drain down the foundation or onto a sidewalk. We know where all of the downspouts are, and we've shown a trench drain, storm trench drain, stone trench for all of those downspouts.
Thank you.
As a result of previous comments related to roof runoff, all landscape features on the garage sides of buildings A, B, and C have been removed. Basically, we had shown plant materials within those stone trenches, but we've removed them based upon Mr. Rowley's comment. So I'm going to skip comment number 5 and number 6 and go to comment number 7, where the comment is details for a roof drain that is on 3 sides of the pro shop were previously requested but are not shown. No proposed elevations are shown that would indicate that the discharge point will not be flooded. That's a little incorrect, disingenuous in the fact that the previous comment was, what was previously requested was clarification as to whether or not there is an existing or proposed trench drain around the pro shop, and if the trench drain was proposed, to provide a detail for it. The previous response was that it was not a trench drain, it's not existing and not proposed, and a note was added to the plan to clarify the fact that it's not a trench drain. And a detail for the downspouts was already included on the plan set, so we didn't need to add another detail.
Again, could you point me to the plan set we're referring to on this comment?
So page 4 of 18. We're discussing the pro shop, and as you can see, there's a line shown on 3 sides of the pro shop that has a little D associated with it, and the question had been whether or not that was a trench drain. It's not a trench drain. What we're proposing is to have the downspouts for the building tie in and discharge to the stormwater. So we put a note on the plan to clarify, and it says downspouts to be piped to forebay. And again, the downspouts are, there's a detail on the plan already.
You see it, Paul?
I don't see it, no.
I had to look twice
Oh, downspout pipe to floor.
I had to look 3 times before I found it.
Thank you.
As previously requested, 12-inch long hoods for the pipe outlets for the double-graded catch basin are not shown. There's a note on the plan for the single grate catch basins that has a very intricate detail for the 12-inch hood. The note on the double grate catch basin just said that the hood, as required, needed to be provided, but we can make it a little bit more clear on the detail that the hood is a 12-inch hood. Again, it doesn't change the type of catch basin or anything like that. It's just a component of that detail that. A construction note detail, exactly. It is the applicant's choice to construct an expensive reinforced cement concrete retaining wall to the rear of Building D. However, there appears to be substantial room to do a much less expensive alternative. Early on in the process, we did have a grading plan that had a slope, and we were concerned that the amount of grading work that would be required would cut into the existing vegetation. There's woodland between this proposed development and the existing residences along Onset Avenue, and we felt that it was better to install a retaining wall in order to be able to keep as much of that existing woodland as possible. So yes, it is the applicant's choice to construct the retaining wall, rather than looking for a much less expensive alternative that we don't believe is viable. There was one comment that came via email on April 23rd. Why are you using two two-foot diameter pipes out of the Pro Shop parking area where the flow rate is noted as 6.78 CFS, while the pipe from CB4 is a single 24-inch pipe with a flow rate of 9.89 CFS? Are 2 pipes actually necessary? I don't see the information in your calculations. I went back and looked at it because it seems that it is going to be difficult to put 2 parallel 24-inch pipes inside a catch basin that is only 5 foot inside diameter at CB5. In this particular instance, and if I can show you on this grading plan, so the 2 catch basins that we're discussing, so there's one double catch basin right here, and there's a single catch basin right here. This has total going into this pipe right here, 9 and change CFS. This catch basin over here has only 6 CFS going into it. However, the difference between this scenario and this scenario is that we've got multiple catch basins trapping surface water to get them into the piping system, so that we are not concerned with 9 CFS at this point right here necessarily getting trapped, because we have multiple catch basins and multiple pipes. It's a much more robust system, quite frankly. In this particular instance here, this entire parking lot is draining to this catch basin here. Now, that's not necessarily a problem, and we certainly can have one catch basin, and it will be able to control the flows for 6 CFS, and the piping system will control 6 CFS. But out of an abundance of caution, quite frankly, we made this a double catch basin so that we have a bigger square footage surface area to allow the water to get into the catch basin system. And we made the pipe system double as well, again, also to make sure that if for some reason there's leaves there or some sediment or something like that, we want to make sure that there is no flooding in this particular instance. So we overcompensated by doing a double catch basin and a double pipe system. And looking at that, we realized we had left the 24-inch diameter pipe outflow that we had proposed, and that would be problematic with only a 5-foot interior dimension catch basin structure. So we are going to drop the size of those 2 pipes to 18 inches instead of 24 inches, and that will work with that size basin. And again, it's over an abundance of caution. It's not required to be double. but we wanted to make sure that there was not gonna be any instance where we had flooding in that particular area, because we do have handicap accessibility, et cetera, in that particular vicinity. So again, it was an abundance of caution, not because that there was an issue. So those are all the details relative to the changes that Mr. Rowley had requested, with the exception of some of the comments that had to do with handicap accessibility, as well as landscape buffers and where driveway access portions are. So if I could hand off, and Bill, I believe you have your comments for comment number 5 and number 6, which are relative to the landscape areas, if you could take those.
Sure. We're on comment number 5, excuse me. Landscape features within the layout lines of Bay Point Drive are in conflict with the intended purpose of the use of the layout for utilities and other street-type features for their entire length and width. The full width of streets as laid out in the provisions of Chapter 41, Section 81W are dedicated for access and egress and for the installation of utilities not for private development or landscaping. There's a couple of responses to that particular suggestion from Mr. Rowley. One is, this is a private way. This private way has been laid out way before the initial approval for this project was given, the initial approval way back when we started on phase 1. So he owns, Mr. Bay Point owns the fee underneath that road. It is not a public road. He owns the fee. He has the right to move it to any place that he wants. As a matter of fact, there's a relocation planned here, and he has the right to, he will also own the adjacent parcel when this is done, which means they will merge together. So there is plenty of room for landscape features, if it's even necessary, because the parking lot adjacent to parking lots, landscaping needs only public streets. This is a private street, so the necessity even for having any landscaping there could be questioned, but we're willing to do that. I mean, that makes sense. It makes a better looking entrance. So his ownership of the entire fee and the right to move it where he finds appropriate, in no way are we going to impede the right-of-way that would be insufficient for safe traffic for egress and egress. It's going to remain a road similar to what's there now, much better condition, that would allow traffic in and out without in any way compromising the safety. At the same time, would allow him to accomplish the purpose of the development. And the other interesting feature is that Mr. Crowley has suggested through the bylaw, the only design feature that this board has in the CR district is screening. So we're talking about landscaping. You are free to impose any standards that you want. You are not bound by the bylaw in that section. You have an independent right to impose screening. You can reduce the amount of screening that would be necessary. You can increase the amount of screening that's necessary. So we think you can accomplish all of that with the plan that has been developed here. We're going to have screening. We're going to have safe exit and egress. At the same time, the ability to install utilities really will fall back on the Bay Point Club if additional utilities need to be done, and they are in control of that whole entire right-of-way, no matter how it's configured. So for those reasons, we feel we can do this, and the merger of the lot lines really accomplishes a lot of that. It's kind of Mr. Fay alluded to before, a lot of the easement issues and all that kind of go away when one owner owns the entire parcel. And then the next one is number 6. The landscape features for private property should be contained within the limits of the lots. This applies to the pro shop landscaping in front of the buildings A and B. Again, it will be contained within the limitations of the lot because the lot now has expanded to include the cedar parcel. So we own it all. So anything that we build in that area is our lot, if you will, and therefore we can use the full lot to accomplish our purposes. Those are the only 2 that I had.
Charlie, you have any comment on that? And forgive me for not taking what you're saying, as the gospel. I rely a lot
I
on
understand.
Charlie's expertise.
Yep.
Which did you want me to address, Mr. Chairman?
Well, I'd like to start with the items that it's William,
Yep, Bill.
had just talked about as far as the landscaping and whatnot encroaching onto Bay Point Drive.
All right. There's no question in my mind but what Bay Point Drive is a private way. That is true. It's not a town way. It's not been accepted by the town as a town way, nor is it a public way in the sense of, you think of the public having all rights in there. However, the public does use that street nevertheless, as a guest of either Bay Point condominiums or guests of the golf course. But it has always been that streets that are laid out under the subdivision control law are intended for access, and they're also intended for the purpose of putting in utilities of all sorts along their entire length and throughout their entire width. That's a requirement, and it's upheld by an attorney whose name is Sidney Smithers, who wrote a very extensive document on streets and ways that included not only private streets but public streets, the taking of streets by the town, the taking of streets and the layout of streets by the state, and so forth. It's always been the position of the town that it is dedicated for that purpose, whether it's a private way or not. This project is set up and confined to the lot that ultimately will become presumably the property or Bay Point. Currently, it is not. So in order to define that, there has to be some definition of the lot, and the lot is defined by the boundary between the layout of Bay Point Road and the lot configuration that is shown on the plan which you have before you. Typically, whenever you have done site plans before, whether a street is laid out as a private street or not, and typically any subdivision street or any other site plan that has been prepared before you, if it has a laid-out street involved in it, the improvements are contained within the lot and not a part of the layout, because the layout is established for the purpose of putting in utilities, whatever those utilities might be, at whatever location is appropriate for them to be shown on. So it will continue to be my view that Bay Point Drive, in its location, from sideline to sideline, should be dedicated for those purposes and not for the individual improvements it might be for the adjacent property. And it should be left on the adjacent property. The property boundary established the limits of where that approval will take place. As far as the board having the right to make changes, it can do so as far as a site plan is concerned anytime you wish. That part is true. But if you're going to make changes within a street layout, you can only do that through the subdivision process, because that's how streets are controlled within the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. You either do it through a taking by the town, which means it's an easement by the town, or you go through the subdivision process of holding a public hearing and laying the street out accordingly and dedicating it for that purpose, which it was done originally. So as far as being able to use it for other things, I don't hold that to be true at all. It's dedicated for specific use, access, egress, and for the laying of public utilities throughout its length and throughout its width. And the width is not confined to the pavement. It's confined to the limits between where the property of a particular lot starts and where the layout begins. So that would be the distinction I would make between the argument that's been made that they can put landscaping in the layout and why I say, no, it belongs on the lot.
Okay, so if I understand correctly, your intention, once you have control of the property, is to reconfigure Bay Point Drive in such a fashion that Charlie's concerns go away, because now it's gonna move further away from the development of Phase 4? Or is Charlie's concerns stay in place?
Well,
I quite honestly don't understand what the concerns are, so.
No,
So I was
well,
hoping
there
somebody
was-
could, on one of these diagrams, because I don't follow the discussion.
Right.
I know a comment you're referring to, and it was said that they might change the layout of Bay Point Drive.
I think it moves slightly.
I don't think that was intended. They're not going to change the layout of Bay Point Drive. The construction of Bay Point Drive from Onset Avenue to Station 13, which is roughly in front of the clubhouse, was approved for reconstruction as a part of Phase 1. And it shows the location of the proposed pavement.
Yes,
if
and that
there's-
road moves slightly.
I'm sorry?
That road moves slightly from what's there today, which was my response to putting the sidewalk in. We need the road in its final location so we can get the utilities and the sidewalk in. That was me
It did
responding.
move a little bit, but you
It is,
didn't.
right, so that's my point. It
All
it
you
is
did
moving
was
a little
move the
bit.
pavement a little bit. You didn't
Right.
change the layout.
Right,
The layout did not change, because as of the time when we first talked about this, if you recall, Mr. Fay, I suggested that anything to do with land court would be a real issue for you. Subsequent to that, you went through with a process with the land court and took all registration out of the property that you own, as I understand it. So that's probably not an issue anymore as far as the land court's concerned. But you're not doing anything on that property that changes the layout lines. You're maintaining the layout lines that were shown as a part of the reconstructed Phase 1 and the reconstructed Phase 2, as shown on your plan,
so
right
as
there.
a layperson, I want the pavement located so I can then locate the sidewalk. So I understand what you're saying. I do believe that at the turn, that has changed from what is there today.
That's correct.
Okay, so that's my
That
point.
layout was changed, and it was approved under the subdivision control law. So we're not making any changes to the configuration of the lines that define the road.
Correct.
All right? There's no changes taking place there.
Correct, but the road itself, when we make these improvements, will look different than the road that's there today.
That's absolutely understood.
Okay,
It's
that was my only point.
where you
With
make
then
the
locating
intersection to
sidewalk.
Starboard Drive is going to be entirely different than what you see out there today.
Correct.
Understood.
Okay.
I don't understand
So
this point at all.
that has no bearing on the issue that I have of putting individual landscaping features and a driveway for this last phase within the layout of Bay Point Drive.
Right,
And
and
where
that.
are we doing
could-
that, Karen? Can you point
I
where
say,
we're
Can you
doing
point
that?
that out for us?
Okay.
Sheet 6 shows.
I'll be the layperson asking the questions.
So on sheet 3 of 18
Hang on.
is the site layout plan. If you see where it's labeled Bay Point Drive, private width varies, and between Bay Point Drive, private width varies is a very dark line, and then on the other side of that dark line, you see Building B, 6 units with garages. Does everybody have that location?
Yep.
Okay. So, from my understanding of Mr. Rowley's point, is that right now, that right-of-way line, easement line, property line, whatever you want to call it,
And that's the dark line.
that's the dark line. As of today, on one side of that dark line, Bay Point owns. On the other side of that dark line, the town owns. So the town owns where the buildings are right now, okay? When and if this property is sold to Bay Point, this lot, if you will, becomes part of the overall development. Again, Bay Point Drive is private. This property will be private, owned on both sides by the same property owner. What we're proposing is that the access drive, as you can see here, it's a one-way access drive, comes in closer to Onset Avenue, comes along the front of the buildings, and then comes out again onto Bay Point Drive. There is a short section of the access drive
That's in the
that's
roadway layout.
within the right-of-way, if we're gonna use that terminology. Between that and Bay Point Drive is where all of our proposed landscaping is. That's where it currently is today, between Bay Point Drive and the development that there's not much there other than a parking lot, quite frankly. but there's existing vegetation in that area with 1, 2, 3, I think 4 different entrances off of Bay Point Drive to that property. So we're gonna continue and maintain as much as possible the existing vegetation, but we're also adding to it in the landscape plan. So between Bay Point Drive and those residences and the parking for those residences, there will be a landscape buffer. But that landscape buffer, on some areas, is on the development CETA side of that line, and on some areas, it's on the right-of-way, easement, whatever you wanna call it, portion of that line. So the landscape buffer will be there. It will function, and it's been designed by a registered landscape architect. It's just, where does that landscape buffer fall once the property is sold and Bay Point Drive is owned? Again, both sides of that line will be owned by Bay Point.
Okay,
That's not how I
if
understood
I understand what Charlie's saying correctly, though, is that you're proposing landscaping inside the layout lines of the road, regardless of who owns either side of it. It's still within the layout lines of the road. That's the
correct.
concern.
What,
And-
I
and
think
it's
what
gonna
the,
stay in the area that is currently vegetated with no utilities within it.
So there's currently vegetation within the layout lines of the
yeah,
road?
there's nothing been done there. It's just woods and trees have been left since day one.
Yep.
But I think that they're missing a very important point. They don't own it today. The parcel that's under consideration is not owned by them today.
Right.
It's owned by a separate entity. Even if the town or the redevelopment authority, whoever it is, conveys a parcel to Bay Point, they're conveying a parcel. It does not automatically become a part of the incorporated Bay Point Club, shall we say, or the 100 and some odd acres that's there, unless they re-describe the entire parcel to include that after they own it. That's just legally the way it happens.
Is that true?
They will be conveyed a parcel of land, it'll be described in some manner to go around that 7.5 acres. The way it's shown on the plan, I think, of 1993. It was a Bremen engineering plan that actually created that lot. So I would assume that they would use that plan as reference and say they're going to convey the property as shown on that plan. Once they do that, it'll be a separate lot to them until they actually come up with a description that incorporates that into the entire parcel.
Bill, isn't there?
It doesn't,
Isn't there a merger
I'm sorry, I'm
doctrine?
not done, Mr. Fay.
I'm sorry, Mr. Rowley, go ahead.
When they do that, it'll still be a separate parcel. It has to be incorporated as a part of it in order to be included, because if it doesn't get conveyed any other way, it's still, as Mr. Fay has suggested, a non-conforming parcel. And will always be until somehow it's tied to that clubhouse and tied to the par 70 golf course.
But that isn't what the comment says. The comment says landscape is within the boundaries of the road.
That's correct. It's got nothing to do with it. And whether they own both
That's
sides or they own the road has nothing to do with it, because the road is dedicated to a specific use, and that's access and egress and the layout of utilities.
Okay, then why did we even talk about joining the, you lost me when we started talking about joining the lots. The issue is
Because the
really-
comment was made that they will own both sides of it, so basically it doesn't matter. That's not correct. It does matter.
Okay.
Okay. I didn't
That I
understand why we talked about that. Okay.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks, Charlie.
Can you comment?
But let me, well, two things that was mentioned is, I don't believe the layout of the road is within the purview of Bay Point. They own it. So the suggestion that you could say that you have to move that, or anyone could tell us we have to expand that roadway, is not there. There's in a regular street layout, clearly the town has the control over that area and could say, we want to expand this road, we want to make it wider, we've got more traffic. In this case, the town, no one really has the authority to do that other than Bay Point. That layout, as it currently exists, and the paved areas that currently exist, provides for safe egress and egress from the property. So there's no reason to suggest that that's ever going to happen, and they are the only people who could allow it to happen. And specifically in some of the easement documents, because there are easements going to some of the Bay Village and some other areas, it specifically gives them the right to move it, layout, width, any way they want. It can be moved by them at their discretion. So you're looking at something that is, in theory, could happen, but is not, as a practical matter, going to happen. And for that reason, it seems to me that since it is a private road, there's a big distinction there, that they should have the right to do with that road as they would, and as long as they ensure that safe passage continues for other people.
Right, safe egress.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, to Mr. Rosa, just a point of clarification to help me understand. As you said, this is a private road, I understand that. But when private roads are set, and help educate me, because it's a question, that's subject to subdivision control law, and we work with applicants to lay out roads as part of subdivision control law. So wouldn't we, and didn't we, as a town, when the subdivision was defined, have some say over where that road was? And because it's specified in a subdivision, definitive subdivision plan, wouldn't we then have some say if it gets moved, to have to reopen the subdivision plan? Isn't that how it works, or help me understand?
You're correct, but
I'm asking for
no,
help.
first of all, what's before you is not a subdivision plan. That's important. No, it's a site plan review. There's not a subdivision here. That's
I
not.
thought when the original hearing was read, I thought it said site plan and subdivision.
No, I don't believe that's the case. I believe it's site plan and special permit was what was originally proposed. If you
Okay, I
look-
could be wrong, but
if you look at the face sheet of that plan that you
I
have.
believed it was a subdivision plan also.
Okay, I'm just looking at the face sheet here. Modifications to special use permit and site plan approval. So there's no mention there of subdivision.
This is site plan and special use permit.
Site plan and special
Okay,
permit.
because, all
So
right,
we're not-
phase 2 and 3 was a subdivision.
Yes, it was.
Okay,
Correct.
so my mistake in,
Right. So we're not.
I'm just trying to keep up.
No. So you're absolutely right. If we came, but you're actually, the road is moving, and it has been approved, and we're going to comply with what you've already approved. And so, again, it goes back to my point about further, if we wanted to further subdivide, then you have some say. But until that happens, it's my opinion that they have the right to use the land as they proposed it.
Well, they don't have the right to use it until they buy
Well,
it.
but again, any plan you approve is conditioned, if they don't buy the
Well,
land, you're absolutely right. They don't,
let me-
we don't have anything
still-
going on then. We're absolutely right.
You're talking about, helping you understand, and I'm gonna talk to you like a blue-collar layman. Why haven't you bought the land yet? It seems to me like all the fussing that's going on over this has a lot to do with the fact that you don't own the land yet.
Well, I don't think so. I think the problem would present itself if we did own the land, because Mr. Crowley's point is that, we can't do this whether we own it or not. So that would be the same. But I mean, anytime you approve a plan, I'm sure you've had many plans in front of you, you approve it with the understanding that unless you acquire the land, you can't do what we've just approved. And that's the exact same situation we have here. So I think it is important, to just say we can't do it because we don't yet own it, to me, doesn't fit into how you approve plans all the time. You're constantly approving plans that the people don't own the land. Once you approve it, they acquire the land, and then they build it in conformity with what you've told them they can do. So for that reason, I don't think the ownership of the land today is important, because if they're gonna do this, they have to own that land. There's no way they can build what they're proposing here unless they own that land, and that's to acquire from the town, or from the, so for that reason, I don't think that is what's coming into play here.
All right. Any other questions on that topic?
This isn't, have you confirmed this is not we didn't reopen the subdivision plan?
I didn't see if the announcement had said whether or not it was a subdivision as well.
All right, I've been operating under that impression, and. All right, so at issue then, if I'm gonna summarize and play back, is, can you put vegetation within the roadway? And that's the issue. And you contend you can, and Mr. Rowley contends you can't.
Correct. And I'm not sure, and I wasn't involved in the original approvals, whether there was ever, those engineer types will do it, whenever there was ever a layout of Bay Point Road, because it pre-exists all the subdivision approvals, everything that you've done. Bay Point has been there. I don't think it's ever shown up in a subdivision
Well,
plan.
it got approved as a subdivision plan somewhere in history, right?
But I don't know that the layout was approved.
Oh,
It was if you look at the original plan for Phase 1, it says existing roadway, private.
No,
And
no,
that's
I
all it
meant
says.
somewhere in history.
Oh, well, I'm not so sure about that. I mean, it may predate, because the golf course has been there for a long, long time. I couldn't find it. I'm not saying it isn't there, but.
So moving beyond that, the net issue is, you're showing vegetation within the 40-foot width of the road, and Mr. Rowley says you can't, so that, we just have to decide on that.
Right.
Unless and you guys need that vegetation, could you take?
Well, again, that's why my point before about the screening, you could waive that screening completely,
Well, we could.
or reduce it,
Or you could leave if the vegetation.
It's more than just the screening, it's the access also that's being used as the driveway for that second building. Anything that interferes with that full width of the layout to be used for utility purposes is not the way that it should be held.
But I don't see on this chart how that access road encroaches on the road. I see how it crosses that dark black line, but that's not the road line. I don't see how this access encroaches.
Right here. There's your dark line, which is the road layout.
No, it's not, that's not the road layout. This is the road layout. Up here.
That's the pavement.
This is,
Are you-
that's the,
Are you looking on sheet 4, Carl?
yeah, I am. Oh, I'm looking on sheet 3, I'm sorry. But I see this,
My understanding of Mr. Rowley's concerns is that this portion of the access,
but where, I thought he was saying it was in the roadway, and the road,
he's saying it's within the right-of-way.
The right of-
that's not what he said. He said it was in the roadway.
No, it's within the
Right of way.
He's saying that we can't put any pavement, we can't put any vegetation, we can't put anything within that right-of-way because it all has to be free in perpetuity for utilities, et cetera, which, we don't believe is the case.
Mr. Chairman, through you to Mr. Rowley, can
Yes.
you clarify for us what constitutes the road layout? It's not the pavement.
Correct.
So
The road layout is the line that separates lots on either side of it from that area that can be used for roadway purposes. I don't know how else to say it. Normally, your layout is a strip of land which is wider than the pavement because you utilize that area on both sides for grading, for shoulders, for utilities, for sidewalks, for streetlights, for anything else that would be of a
Landscaping,
a
street
nature
trees.
that it would enhance public safety and so forth. And that's established basically under the subdivision control law where it talks about the reasons why you lay out a street. And it's defined for that purpose so that it separates out that portion of the private which is used for access and so forth from the lot which is provided next to it for purposes such as residential building, commercial building, whatever else you want to do. And the purpose of that separation is so that there will be a definition to each lot. It does, the right to improve private property does not extend beyond the layout line of a street. Layouts are established in Massachusetts either by the town, the state, or the planning board in the case of private ways. And it doesn't matter who owns the private way. The private way is still subject to those same general standards of access, egress, and the use of that area between those imaginary lines for the establishment and maintenance of utilities wherever and whenever they might be established. So
I
that they
guess-
may not end up today. The pavement of Bay Point Drive is probably not more than 20 to 22 feet at this point. The layout of Bay Point Drive at Onset Avenue is 50 feet wide.
50.
So it means that there is space on both sides to do those improvements that would be commonly found within a laid-out street. And it's restricted to those things. So to put improvements in there, which are obviously a portion of a developed area which abuts it, interferes with the operation of that as a street. And that's all I'm trying to say.
Okay.
It doesn't matter whether it's owned by the same entity as the private property adjacent to it that's being developed or not, because that layout is subject to the ability to use that layout for those purposes of utilities and access. Not only that, Bay Point may be the owner of Bay Point Drive, and it does say that it's private and its width varies, but it varies only because it goes from 50 feet to 40 feet. And that was beyond an area that was originally shown on a land court plan, and as I talked about with Mr. Fay, real early on, I said, if you're gonna change the layout of Bay Point Drive, which they did for phases 1, 2, and 3, I said, do it beyond the edge of the land court plans so you don't have to mess with them. It's a pain in the neck to try and deal with the land court, which he assented to do and changed it accordingly. The layout lines, I have no issue with. They are where they are. It's the use of the layout that I'm concerned with.
Yeah,
And it should be
understood.
restricted to the layout that's confined within the lot, which has 7.48 acres or whatever it is.
So the assumption is that the layout works into the Bay Point property from the property line of the Wareham-owned lot, correct?
Yes.
Because I see, when you get around the bend there, that it gets quite wide, so the roadway actually looks like it probably is outside of 50 feet from the property line of the Wareham property. So I guess I wonder if there's, what I'm not seeing here, I see a property line and I see edges of pavement and I see a sidewalk, but I don't see any lines that depict where the layout is.
I think you have to go back a sheet or two.
Is that this line? Right, well, that's the property line.
Look at sheet 2, Jane.
That's the property line.
That's the layout line
But
as
then you
well,
get
too.
to here, and if you go 50 feet, you know, you're here somewhere.
That's why it says
So-
variable, yeah. That's why it says variable, because
See,
it's modified.
this is Charlie's issue right here.
Yeah, I understand, and I'm trying to take this one bite at a time.
Ken, could you?
Are you looking at sheet 2?
Can you show me which lines
I'm looking at sheet 3.
that
Look at two.
Charlie's concerned about? I see, this is the road.
And this is the right of way.
Whole discussion,
So
isn't
it's-
there a merged
It's the right-of-way line that matters.
concept when these
That's not the
lands
road layout.
become
Understood,
same
and
ownership.
I get that, but,
Well, the road,
But-
you're thinking pavement.
No, I'm thinking whatever is defined on the plan as the road.
So the road layout might be 40 and 50 feet wide, the 22 feet of pavement. So that leaves 10 and 12 feet on either side.
Right.
And his contention is they're approaching into
But
that 10
that's,
or
not.
12
But
feet,
that's not the right-of-way line, is it?
the road layout.
That's what I'm trying to figure out, which line on the plan that line is. This is the right-of-way line, I understand
back,
that.
it's brand
What's the
new.
road layout line?
See this black line here?
Yeah, that's the right-of-way line.
That's the road layout.
Okay.
See how,
No, I understand that,
See
but
how they're
I
encroaching out
understand
into
that.
that
It's
space?
really a definition of lines. So, in one case, it's called a right-of-way line, and
but in the other, it's a
road
road layout.
layout line.
Right, we call it apples and oranges, but it's the same.
that's what I'm
Same fruit
confused.
salad.
That's why I'm
I'm calling
confused.
it screening for this project.
All right, let's,
Until it's all
yeah, because I'd like to get a hold, this is getting out of hand, so let's move on.
understand that a project becomes before a board.
Folks, if we could be quiet, please.
Control, the rules and regulations that the town has. We have, defined what is appropriate for a rights of way within where we put in the subdivision road and the utilities, for subdivisions of land. And the distance, the right of way itself is something like 40 or 50 feet. That's the area in which all the utilities and the road, the access, everything that moves through the area provides the access to the adjacent land, so you can subdivide the land and develop it. This provides all the support to the adjacent land that is developed. but the layout of the road itself, the pavement, is something smaller. Here it could be 22, 24 feet or something in that order, where that's the road, and beside it or underneath it could be utilities. It could be underground utilities, could be above ground utilities, could be a series of telephone poles, or more commonly what we like to see is underground utilities. So then you have a sidewalk as well that runs along the road, beside the road as well. And maybe there's a sidewalk on both sides of the road. Maybe it runs over on top of one of the utility lines as well too. What you don't want to do is have too many of those overlapping, so you don't have to dig up one to get to the other. But in doing this, what happens is there is also the addition of a buffer, a vegetative buffer along the side where you have street trees that are put in. And that vegetation, that buffer of vegetation can be used for the purpose of beautifying the street and making the street look a little bit nicer as it is improved with green vegetation. What's happened is that the adjacent property is extending Landscape Island into the right-of-way and maybe make it more substantial, where there's some vegetation that's being used as a control on the passage of vehicles through the driveways that exist throughout the connections to the roadway, where a driveway comes in, say, and it runs along, there's a landscape buffer in between. That's quite common to have a landscape in the right-of-way as well as the rest of the utilities and the pavement itself. The other thing about this is you also have the ability to waive the requirements of the subdivision rules and regulations too. You can say that there should be or more trees or fewer trees because there's other natural vegetation that's there. You could say that some portion of the right-of-way has to be set aside for some vegetative buffer as well. It is possible that you could use that if you have the additional area that goes beyond the roadway and the utilities and the sidewalks that run through there. Typically, the right-of-way is much larger than is necessary for all the access and supporting infrastructure that allows you to develop the adjacent properties. So it seems that this is not as serious an issue as maybe it's made out to be. You may be aware that in cul-de-sacs, the landscape island in the middle of the cul-de-sacs is sometimes put in place to improve the look of the roadway within the right-of-way.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, through you to Mr. Buckland, just a clarifying point. You said we have the option to waive subdivision rules and regs, but not if this isn't a subdivision plan review, right? We couldn't waive it in this case.
No, you have to have, if necessary hearing said subdivision, you can do that with a.
That was, thank you, that was my understanding.
Okay.
I'd ask, Mr. Chairman,
Yeah.
I'd ask that you take a look at sheet 6 of the plan.
God bless you.
Thank you.
If you look at sheet 6 of the plan, look over in the extreme left, where the road entrance comes in to Building A. You'll notice that the driveway for Building A is all on the property, and the beginning of the landscaping is also on the property. But as you move to the north, you'll see that that driveway crosses over the layout line. And for half of the landscaping, which is in front of Building B, it's all been pushed out into the layout. And it's been pushed out into the layout because that's where the driveway has been thrown out. That driveway belongs on the property itself, not out into the layout of Bay Point Drive, where it interferes with the potential for utilizing that strip for utilities. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah,
So it's not just a matter of a little landscaping here and here. That's not all of it.
Yep.
It's only a portion of it.
Understood.
Understood.
Okay,
But
thank you.
Just to clarify one thing that Mr. Schultz said.
Yeah,
if-
this is
if-
going to be the last comment on this
Okay,
subject.
sure. I don't, what Mr. Buckland said wasn't talking about, he was talking about you have the authority to waive, limit and waive landscaping strips. So you can make that landscaping strip smaller so that it would not interfere with the right-of-way. And I think the other thing that's important to note here is any expense and all that would be involved with having to dig that up if we had to, would fall on Bay Point. It's their land. And I think really, if you look at this from a traffic standpoint, I'm not a traffic engineer, having that inner drive is a safer way than having 3 turnouts, so people are pulling up to the edge and turning out. They pull in once, they can access their units, they're not, so it's a safety feature as well. It makes it more safe. You come in, you're not having cars back up into Onset Avenue because someone's turning right to go into the units. They come in, they can slide into that thing and move along. So for that reason, it provides, it serves as a roadway, irrespective of, what you want to call it. It's a traffic area that helps improve traffic by having that layout in there. So I think for those 2 reasons, it's not unreasonable to say this is not we're not taking away, if you had to put utilities in, we would have to tear up that pavement and do something else. Absolutely agreed to. But in the other sections, and he alluded to it, we reduced the layout by 10 feet and you approved it. So we could come back in a subdivision plan, we couldn't do it with this one, and ask for a reduction of the layout in this area too, which would take 10 more feet off the table, if you would, which is what was done earlier in the 2 and 3 phases. So there's a lot of things that could be done, but the bottom line is, I think that this plan works for a lot of reasons, and one of the alternatives would be to reduce the landscaping buffer and leave what remains there, which would be less attractive, obviously.
I would also like to point out that we coordinated with the fire department, and it was also their request that there be this aisle located in this location for their closer access for fire safety purposes to the buildings.
Okay, thank you. Okay, moving on. What's the next comments? Yeah, you know what that would be this.
I think the last one is,
Charlie was responding.
Yeah, you were asking me about other comments.
Yeah.
I had asked for certain comments to be put on certain sheets of the plans because it's normally where you're going to find these construction details identified. The plans which you've got are April 6. My comments were written on the 22nd, after I had received the plans just a couple of days before that. Let's start with the ones because Bay Point went through each comment one by one, so I'm going to make a response on each one. Distinguish between the Cape Cod berm and pavers for buildings A, B, and C. I made that because on a previous review that I did, I asked them to specify there are 3 different types of curbing, so to speak, being used on this plan. There's concrete curb, there's Cape Cod berm, and then there are landscape pavers that are being utilized around each driveway entrance that goes underneath the buildings. When you look at the plan, it's not specific on the plans that show those islands that any contractor who's going to build this is going to want to look at to see what that should be. The fact it's on a landscape plan, if he doesn't have that full set of landscape plans, and I have yet to see a contractor who's doing road construction being terribly concerned about landscape plans. They work on plans that show the dimensions, they show the grades, that type of thing, and I simply ask that they be put on the plans. Every time this comes through and I ask for a specific thing to be put on there and it's put someplace else, quite frankly, it drives me nuts. I had asked that the head walls be defined and that the fences be defined because in front of buildings E and F, there are two different retaining walls and there are two different types of fences to be shown. But it wasn't clear on sheet 18, under the labels where those fences were going to be used, that a 4-foot-high picket fence was going to be used for these new walls. So I don't think it's unreasonable to expect they would put that kind of clarifying detail on the sheets the way that it should be. And it seems like I go through this time and time again. This is the fifth report that we've had on this project since we started.
Okay. Okay.
With respect to the, with the retaining walls, if you'll recall, we started out with decorative block walls, which I thought was a pretty good idea. Because where the grading, especially in back of Building D, I think it is, the one that's parallel with Onset Avenue, it's stepped in grade and drops with the slope. So it makes sense to actually step the wall as you go, and you could do that with a decorative wall. The problem was that you couldn't put a fence on top of it, because there was no way to anchor the fence, especially if it was 4 feet high, and especially if it was a solid fence, which I don't think it was in this case. But nevertheless, you can't put it on top of a decorative block wall. So the walls were changed to a cantilevered wall, which has a 4-foot foundation footing, and then it rises from there. But on the plans, it says the walls are varying height. Typically, what you do is you put a top of wall elevation, you put a bottom of wall elevation on the plans for the grading, so you can tell where those elevations are. And in the case of Building D, that grade is continuing to fall. Now, either the wall is going to be all the same height, or somehow the footing and the wall itself is going to be on a slope, because there's no separation, it's not stepped. Those are the kinds of clarifying information that make it much easier for a contractor to know what he's doing, as well as for somebody like myself who has to go out and verify that the
inspect.
construction's in accordance with the plan, that it makes some sense. If you look at the cross-section, it shows one section, a 4-foot wide cantilevered base with reinforcing coming up out of it with a wall of a certain height. Nowhere on the plans does it say that that height varies or is stepped in any way. So either the footing is going to have to slope or the wall height's going to have to change. I don't know which. That's why I put these comments in there. It's not for the fun of it. It's not because I want to find fault with Mr. Fay or anything else. It's got nothing to do with that. But it has to do with good engineering plans and laying out plans that anybody other than myself who has to go out there and make an inspection, Lord knows, I may be struck dead tomorrow morning, who knows? If I am, somebody else is going to go out and make that inspection. It ain't going to be me. That's why I put these things together.
Thank you, Charlie.
So,
Respond,
as
Mr.
far as these other things are concerned, when I asked about clarification on the drain that goes around the pro shop, it wasn't for the fun of it. It wasn't labeled on the first plan. It was just a horseshoe-shaped line with another line going out to the drainage area. And the reason I wanted the detail was I wanted to know whether or not that particular foundation drain, or a roof drain, if that's what it is, gets put in a certain depth below grade and is pitched down to that drainage area. If that drainage area fills up with water and backs up in that pipe, is it going to stop the roof water from getting out the pipe? That's what I wanted to know. That's a common sense thing to put on a plan. Give me the elevation of the end of the pipe. It's not there. So these kinds of things I have put in from day one, and sometimes they get answered, sometimes they don't. Sometimes they get ignored. Sometimes they say, go look somewhere else. So
Okay.
I respectfully disagree with a lot of the comments that have been made today about the reasons for doing things. Not all of the comments are fully explaining why. But at this point in time, Mr. Chairman, with the information that I provided, with the information that you have from the applicant, I don't have an awful lot more that I can say. I'm going to have to leave it up to you as a board to decide how you want to go from here on in. I've done about all that I can do.
Okay, I appreciate that, thank you. Tim?
And I would like to respond by saying that we have made every effort to respond to all of Mr. Rowley's comments. We have never tried to ignore. We have never tried to redirect. We have tried to answer to the best of our ability. We have made incredible changes to the types of details, et cetera, that quite frankly are construction level details, are not put on a plan to be reviewed by a town board. This is a private development. It will go to a contractor. When the contractor has questions, he has to provide shop drawings for us to review. We review them as the design engineer. We have stamped the plans. We have done everything per common and reasonable engineering responses.
I appreciate that, I do. And at the end of the day, I think what everybody has to try to respect is that it's our responsibility to make sure that this is done correctly. And if we don't do our due diligence, which includes listening very closely to Charlie, who's a valued opinion, and this thing gets built, and it gets built poorly, and it becomes a problem for the town, they're gonna be looking at us, and specifically me. And I don't wanna be on the front page of the Wareham Weekly.
So, one additional issue to address in this is, Mr. Rowley, have we concluded the discussion on ADA
No.
at this point? So can we have that discussion? That's with Mr. Henderson is
The
going to...
only thing I can say is that I had a response from David Requena back in February that said that the project was required to have accessible routes, but that it was a building matter and that they would take it up then, which I think I have conveyed to you as a board.
So quite a bit
However,
has happened since then, if Mr. Henderson
I know there's been a
could
lot
explain
happened
that.
since then, and the last request was of Mr. Moore to write something. That was last week. But to the best of my knowledge, there's been no response from that. I am still of the opinion that whether you call these individual units townhouses, or whether you call them condominiums, or whether you call them whatever you want to call them, they're still part of multi-unit buildings of 3 or more units, that they are required to have reasonable access in the parking and on sidewalks at least. What you do inside the buildings of no concern of mine. I'm only concerned about what happens on the outside. There are no handicap ramps on any of the sidewalks at all, so that if anybody comes in and has difficulty walking, or they're on a wheelchair, that want to make their way toward any one of these buildings, they're either going to have to raise the wheelchair, or they're going to have to somehow get up on the sidewalk some other way. I don't see where the fact that it's a townhouse has anything to do with that kind of access. What happens in what they define as common areas within the building, I have no control over that. That, in fact, is a building department issue, and I respect their comments with respect to that. I'm only dealing with the access and whether or not it ought to have a handicap ramp on the sidewalk so somebody can get from their car onto the sidewalk with ease. And I think the Section 10 of 521 CMR speaks to that.
If we could,
I'm sorry?
Chris, you need to make your presentation
On the plans?
forcefully.
Well, look at sheet 3. Sheet 3 shows all of the sidewalks, all of the parking, all of the entrances to the buildings.
But those are all private parking spots for these.
Yeah, I know they are.
Yeah, so this is private property, it's like coming up to your house. It's private property.
Well, I respectfully
These are all
disagree, and I
private.
think,
This isn't visitor parking in these lots.
I
in the back.
respectfully disagree, sir. And I think that I will respect whatever the building inspector says has to be done, as I would hope the applicant would, because that was his request, the last correspondence I had.
Could we go back to my question, please? On sheet 3, Mr. Rowley,
Yeah.
when I look at it, what is the sidewalks that I'm?
If you
looking
look at sheet 3, the
the dark.
lines in the dark shading are the sidewalks that abut the parking spaces and which lead to each individual entrance.
So these black lines here, here, here. So all we need is all you're suggesting is we need a curb cut at one point to allow access up under that?
Along here, 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 here,
Right.
here,
So
and
just,
there.
just normal dip.
Just a normal flattening of the curb so that
What
somebody
it
can roll.
is it drops down
Yeah.
Yeah.
on
so-
each side.
Yeah.
And it's detailed depending on where it is. Sometimes they're on the end, sometimes they're in the middle. If they're in the middle, then you separate them with a parking space so that a parking space can't block it.
Okay, thank you.
It's my opinion that those kind of things apply to this.
Okay.
But I'm willing to go along with a determination made by the building inspector, and I have correspondence from David Requena that says, yes, they are.
Well, it
I think
seems
that
to...
was, I'm sorry, I think that was before that we spoke to David, and David thought these were apartments. When it got clarified that they were townhouses, he said that was incorrect.
Well, let
and
me
that
ask you,
is-
let me...
I
let
have
me
correspondence
interrupt you.
here.
Did have that
I
correspondence.
have correspondence here from the ADA, or from the Architectural Access Board. That says section 10.3 applies to this project.
Let me ask you a question. This seems like a really, really small thing. Why are we digging our heels in?
Can't we just do a curb cut on every one of those sidewalks and?
Really?
I don't know the issue.
I would do that in a moment. Now, I don't know what the consequence of that is to then say we need to apply other standards throughout the parking lot. If it's just putting a dip into a sidewalk in a minute, I don't know if that takes us to other areas to say it needs to be ADA compliant.
But couldn't
The
it be a
site is
COA?
sloped.
Let's
Mr.
say
Rowley
we don't
wrote
even
a-
apply
an
the
email
ADA,
this
let's say we
past
don't even
Wednesday.
apply the ADA regulations to this thing as a whole. Let's just set that aside for a minute. Doesn't it lead logical that you would provide reasonable methods of access to people who are going to come here, whether they live here or whether they're a visitor, a friend, that he could at least
Right.
exit himself
that's
to
what
the
I'm saying.
sidewalk?
Why can't we just make him a condition of acceptance?
I believe you could. As the approving authority, I believe that's within your
Would that be acceptable to you?
authorization to do.
That'll take the whole
Certainly
ADA
with
thing
respect
out.
to lessening the curb so that someone could come on it. Absolutely. Now, when you go to other grade requirements on this site, there was a suggestion in a email this past week from Mr. Rowley to reset the building elevations.
That's not what I said, Mr. Fay, and
What
that
was
is
that?
incorrect. Now, don't put words in somebody else's,
It was my
in my mouth.
interpretation of what I read.
I was responding to a comment that was made
Yeah.
with respect to the grades of the building being responsible for why they couldn't do it.
Okay.
And I said, well, maybe you need to take a second look then.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I'm not concerned about that.
Yeah, I don't want to get in to a tit for tat here.
Okay, so we can make a condition of approval on one, two, three, four, five, 6 sidewalks and maybe 2, 1 for each building. 1, 2,
Yeah, a minimum of
4,
one
5, 6, 7.
Minimum of one dip.
And that's, yeah, I'm
On the
absolutely
sidewalk.
fine with that. End of this portion of the program.
Okay.
Okay.
All right,
It seems
cool.
reasonable to me.
I do too. Okay. Moving on.
You would like to
Do
respond?
you
I
need
feel like
anything
you
else
should.
that you need to present or address before I open this up for public comment?
Pardon? Mr. Rowley, would you like a conversation on the E1 sewer pump issues that were raised in your letter?
Unless you have some documentation that I can review, I don't think it would be beneficial to do it right now.
Okay. I believe
I
that
asked
we
for
responded in the letter, and Mr. Principe, have we provided Mr. Rowley with the information requested? Yes. Okay, so to that end, Mr. Rowley will wait for your response to what Mr. Principe has submitted to you.
I'll have to take a look at the comments under pump station summary. This is the first that I've seen this,
Yes, first that I've seen it too.
so I haven't had a chance to see if it answers the questions I had that way.
Is it something
what I-
that we can review, comment on, and be somewhat prepared for our planned meeting on the 9th? Or do you, or are
Yeah, I
we
assume
jamming?
so. One of the things I had asked for, now, I got an email from the planning office last week. There's another set of plans have been dropped off. I assumed that they were plans that might be incorporated into the plan set that you have today, that detailed all of the connections to that, they call it a secondary well that's gonna be out next to the pump station for Phase 2.
Oh, yeah.
They would
like
have
an
some
expansion
dimensions on it
tank,
and so
thing.
forth.
Yeah.
What was there was a simple Phase 2, Phase 3 plan set. But it would be nice to have at least one page in your Phase 4 plan set that deals with that pump station. I don't need to see the whole thing. If that was their intent, fine, but it would be nice if you each had a copy of whatever those sheets might be to incorporate into your plan set. So if they could just pull that out and give you a couple of plans that it's sheet 19 and 20 or whatever they have to do to just incorporate in that plan set, it would be much better. You're gonna have to refer to it at some point anyway. There was no explanation with the plan, so I'm assuming that's why they were submitted.
Those plans were submitted on April 6th with the...
No, they weren't.
Okay.
I only got them,
But Mr. Rowley, when you received them, I understand it was a different date. We responded to the April 6th deadline that we agreed to. We provided the plans for Phase 4, and in that, we were supplied the plan.
You're right, Tim. I got an email back from Aaron saying that he forgot to incorporate that
Right.
into it,
So-
so I didn't get it till later. But
Okay. So
I wasn't
that
expecting
was
a full
why there
set.
wasn't a big explanation with it. We thought it was a replacement
Yeah.
of misplaced plans from the April 6th submission that we made.
Yeah.
Okay, very good.
I have one item, Mr. Chairman. I had asked a while, back when we had a conversation, for a basement plan for the buildings where the lowest level is being used as a garage. I know it's unusual to ask for anything to do with the architecture, but where the basement level is being used as part of the parking count, I would like that included. I'd like to have a chance to review that and have that probably included somehow in the set.
Bless you.
Only because it is part of the parking count.
Sure. Do you have that, Chris?
Okay. Are you... I'm almost afraid to ask this question. Do you have more?
I'm hopeful that this evening was informative,
Well, it's definitely helpful.
and it was helpful. And I appreciate you all, everyone, making special time on a night where you didn't have another meeting scheduled
I
to
would say,
to accommodate us.
I think we needed this night, to be
Right.
quite honest, trying to work around your situation and then 4 or 5 others on the peripherals, which just wasn't...
There's one question that has gone unanswered. And Mr. King, it's a question that you asked as to why I haven't acquired this property. And there's a very long answer to that I'm going to give a very short answer to.
Reader's Digest version would be good, yeah.
We're paying an amount of money that far exceeds the value of the property as it exists. That's a matter of opinion that might vary.
Right.
There was an appraisal done in 2014 that appraises the property at less than this amount of money. There was a legal summary that a law firm for the town prepared as to the development potential of this property, and it analyzed all of the easements and cross easements and perpetual easements. It's a very complicated site. As you pull in on the right, it's in a residential zone. You then cross over into a CR zone. You have a non-conforming CR zone use, and you go right into a perpetual easement to the benefit of the Bay Point Club for the parking lot. So that perpetual easement renders that forever use as parking for the pavilion building. Then you have a small area that maybe some development could happen, and then you have the parking lot and the clubhouse. The town, when it acquired this property in 1993, was going to do a hotel and conference center. Now, as the owner of the Bay Point Club, that would be fabulous, right? If you're a golf course and someone was gonna build a hotel in the middle of your golf course, you would applaud. That never happened. It never happened because that's not a good place for a hotel due to its access. It spent 15 years trying to find the appropriate use for that, all while not having conflict with the Bay Point Club. This is the most, I've been only in the real estate business my entire life. Mr. Rosa can opine to this as a member of the Mass Bar for a very long time. This is the most complicated title I have ever been involved with and owned, and I think, Mr. Rosa, you might opine that it's pretty damn complicated.
40 years, it's about the worst I've ever seen. It's a tough site.
So there's entanglements in this 7-acre piece that require real attention to detail. And when we talk about the merger doctrine and this property combining with the Bay Point Club, it cleanses a lot of insanity that has taken place over the years. So we're prepared to close tomorrow. Can we agree to a price? No, we can't. We've maximized the price by coming up with this development program that only can be executed by the Bay Point Club because it requires participation and elimination of easements by both parties being the grantor and the grantee. So I wanted to share that as we move to try to bring this all to conclusion. We're prepared to close, we want to close.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Are you done?
Any other questions from the board before I open this to public comment? All right, thank you very much.
Thank you for your time.
So, again, thank you, everyone. We really do appreciate your time this evening.
Okay, thank you. All right, at this point, we will open it, open it for public comment. If there's anybody that would like to speak to the subject, please come forward, identify yourself, make your statement. The only thing I would ask is try to avoid regurgitating the same point that the person made before you. If you hear what's on your mind come out of the mouths of somebody else prior to you, then just respectfully, allow them to make your point for you and just save us all a little bit of time, so that we don't drag this on unnecessarily. So having said that, is there anybody that would like to come forward? Ma'am?
Let's go back to this.
Ma'am, you have to come up to the... You're on television now, you're a star. Just identify yourself and
Okay, my name's Sheila.
you have to say.
I have to sit.
We need to hear you at the microphone.
It is. My name's Sheila Hastings. I live in Bay Point Village. now, I'm new to all this, so maybe I'm showing my ignorance. But when Mr. Fay gave his presentation, he explained that the various drainage pipes from Bay Point Village, where I live, from the pavilion, from the golf course, and from all the units in his development, ones that are already built and ones that he plans to build, are all going to drain down into this new pump house. Is that correct?
Well, we're talking about the sewer system, yes.
Yes, the sewer system.
Yeah.
Are all going to, the effluent is all going down to this new pump, a new pump house.
Correct.
If that's the case, does he own the pump house? Are the people in Bay Point Village totally dependent on his maintaining that pump house? Or else, we face the possibility in the future of backup?
Yeah, the way I understand it is he does maintain ownership and responsibility for maintenance. But as I think I made a point earlier, it's not Bay Point Village who would be on the losing end of a pump house failure. It would be the entire
Right,
neighborhood.
I understand that
would
everyone,
be- that-
everyone would suffer equally.
Right, but that would be no different than any other subdivision in town. You know, if there was a catastrophic failure, there would be multiple households that would be affected. So it's not gonna, I can't speak for Mr. Fay, but I can't believe that it would be in his best interest to put 200 or 300 households at risk of a sewage failure.
I could see where that would not be the case.
That would be wouldn't be a good business
But
decision.
it wouldn't be the associations for these various developments that would have to work together to maintain the pump house? It would be the Bay Point Club or Stone Street Corporation that would?
Well, just correct me if I'm wrong, because I was reading through this today. So the way I understand it is the Bay Point Village would maintain the lines from your neighborhood through the first pump house to the collection that new container, or whatever you want to call it, is at the new pump house. And anything prior to that would be theirs, anything post that would be yours.
So there.
You would have to come forward, Tim.
So, if we can go back to this chart. So, this existing pump station is Phase 1,
I
the
understand.
Bay Point Village, the clubhouse,
I got you, I know that.
and the pavilion. We have an agreement, and that group of people share that expense.
Right.
Expense of operations, maintenance, et cetera. There's a
But-
new pump station being built down here. This group, those four, will not share in that pump station expense. The 56 units in phases 2 and 3, and the 52 units in phase 4 will dump into that, and the Bay Point Club and those condominium associations will manage that.
Okay.
It's not an expense of Phase 1 or the Bay Point Village.
Okay. So even though it's not an expense for us to maintain it in Bay Point Village, we are still dependent on it, though.
Sure.
At the end of the day,
Because
you would be.
Sure.
Because
Right.
everything
We're all
flows,
dependent on that working properly, just as we're all dependent on the pump station in this, the current pump station working properly. Same concept.
Yeah.
so the control of this new pump station, which ultimately is responsible for everything, handles everything, would be in the control of the Bay Point Club.
There will be an agreement, there's an agreement right now between the Bay
Right.
Point Club and Bay Point Village. There'll be a similar agreement between these entities,
Proportioned out, you mean?
proportionate, yes.
Okay. And, Mr. Fay, what happens if when you're done with all of your development, and your phases are all completed, and you're left with running the golf club and the pavilion and so on? What if you decide to sell? Who controls the sewer arrangements?
So those Pardon me? Those, so, right, well, it will be, that's the correct answer, whoever buys it, but it will be an agreement that lives similar to all these other agreements that we've been layering, one on top of the other for all this time, right?
This person would
So-
buy this agreement too?
They buy it subject to, yes.
Okay, that's it.
I'm happy to answer
Thank
those
you.
types of questions.
Thank you.
Here, Souza, 39 Bay Point Drive. I have a question for Mr. Fay. He's talking about the pumping system where the village will be excluded for any expenses on the second pump. Did I understand that correctly?
Correct.
What about Phase 1 Wynwood Pines, because we're in that same pumping station?
Well, no, when he drew his finger around that area, he included Phase 1 along with the village. So
That's certain, right?
am I incorrect, Tim?
So we're going to be included in that deal, we're not responsible for the second pump?
Correct.
Okay. On the Phase 4 development, is there going to be a net where the ninth green approaches that development to protect these people from the golf balls?
I don't think we've discussed that. I can't answer that question.
Well, it is a danger point because I live on Bay Point Drive across the street from the golf course, and my house gets hit quite a bit. I still have damage on my house that was reported back in November, and no one does anything about it. So I think we need to resolve who is going to be responsible for golf ball damage, because you have lots of people coming up and down those streets now. Okay, you have smooth roads, there's strollers, bicycles, and the balls are coming across the street, down the street.
Okay, well, I think as far as our discussions with Phase 4, I can see where the netting kind of falls into place, and we can certainly discuss that as a board. But as far as who's responsible for golf ball damage and such, I think that's outside the purview of this discussion.
Okay, but it is a danger, it's a danger potential for those people,
I understand.
because we're getting hit across the street and we're nowhere near the tee.
Quite honestly, if it were me, I think that would be a discussion between me and my insurance agent.
Well, there was just a lawsuit up in Kingston over people that were hit with golf balls.
No,
and-
I understand.
And the damage.
But I think we're discussing.
I know, I just want to bring it up, that's all.
Okay, understood.
I just want to bring that up.
Yep.
And the question going back to the sewer is, and Mr. Fay or Mr. Principe can answer that, there is a new location for the force main, correct? This was just discovered last fall.
Yes.
So all the other diagrams are incorrect with respect to the force main?
The final path of it.
Yes, right, because it's in a new location now, it was discovered in the fairway. So is the solution going to be, it's going to come out of that pipe, it's going to be routed there to the pump house, Tim?
So we spent 3 weeks looking.
I couldn't understand, when you were talking, I couldn't understand, it was muffled on here.
So we spent 3 weeks looking for the force main that comes out of the pump house. It's in a different location. It travels down, across the golf course, down the fairway. So we have now found that, and your question is, we start here for these 52 units. We have a force main that comes up into the street, and then it travels gravity down to the new pump station.
Okay, but what about the existing one that comes down the fairway? Based on a paragraph I read in Mr. Principe's document, it was going to cut across the fairway to the pump house. Is that correct?
So it comes out of the pump house here.
Right.
It cuts across the parking lot of the clubhouse right now. It goes down basically as you're coming towards the green, the right side of the fairway. And we will cut it right into this pump station right here. There's then a portion of the existing force main that's abandoned. And there's one new force main coming out of the combined tank that then exits onto Onset Avenue.
Okay, so based on Mr. Principe's letter of 3/21, he was going to be coming back into our pipe. He was going to exit,
Yes, please.
So, no, I know this is a schematic, but if, just for clarification purposes, this is just a cookie cutter sketch. We have a flow equalization manhole that we have, which we're gonna tie into
know you
that
added a
force
new one,
main.
right.
Correct, that's gonna tie in a flow equalization manhole. That manhole then is gonna gravity to our pump station, where it's going to meet up with our gravity system for Starboard Drive and Beacon Street in phases 2 and 3. And then it will exit under force main to tie into that existing line that goes out onto Onset Avenue. We're not planning on.
right.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So
That means
you're
You're talking
re-entering
about
this.
here?
No, right here.
Existing force main.
No,
Right
he's
here.
talking about this one.
You're going to exit here, go to the pump, and then you're going to re-enter it here and continue.
Yeah, correct. So we're gonna tie back in.
That's
So
what your paragraph said in a letter.
yeah, correct. Yeah, we're retying you in. So this is your line from this existing pump station after it was as-built. It's in the middle of the fairway of hole 11. We're gonna cut it into there and put it into flow equalization manhole. That's your line from the existing pump station is gonna get tied into our new pump station, where this is also receiving phase 2 and 3.
Right.
And then we're going to pump up into this via gravity. So yes, so we're gonna reconnect you into the new pump station.
Even though that's a 35-year-old system, there's no risk cutting into that and then disturbing that and coming back into it?
Well, again, they're gonna have to make the appropriate measures once it's excavated and dug and inspected. So they're gonna have to certify it watertight once they install that. They're gonna have to pressure test that.
This is not on any of the charts right here.
Yeah, I mean, that was just a sketch from Tim.
That's-
That's on there, that's
That's
on
me
the,
with a red pen.
that's on the existing.
I don't see it on the
phase.
Phase 4 one.
So phase 4, again, I mean.
You
phase
just have a
4
sewer
is
line
foot
going
system.
across.
This is FM.
That's the old one, though.
I-
This one goes through the parking lot.
I
This,
thi-
this
Correct.
is not part of the Phase 4.
It's on,
Yeah,
oh, sorry.
well,
Right? It's not
And-
on
and I-
that
and I
design,
think
though,
Sure.
where it exists today, where you don't, where we didn't know where it was.
I
It shows it going down the
I
street.
can walk you through
I
that.
think.
No, I don't need to, I understand it.
I think the question's been answered.
Oh, okay.
You asked about what the path of the line, he's answered the path. I think we can
Yeah,
move on,
right.
okay? Is there anything else that you need to address?
Yes, and earlier, Mr. Fay said Phase 1 is almost complete. We still have a lot of problems to resolve there,
As far as?
as we have punch lists inside the house.
Inside the house is
I
not the
know, I'm
purview of this
finished,
board.
I know, I'm just giving you the big picture.
I understand.
We have outside issues that have to be addressed. We have shut-off valves for our infrastructure. They're still below ground in some cases. That's got to be brought up to level, okay? I walked around the property with Mr. Fay and Mr. Reynolds in November, going over the issues that needed to be addressed from a construction point of view. And here it is, May, nothing has happened. Robin was supposedly putting things together, and nothing has occurred.
Okay.
So we have
why
that.
Why don't you do this for me? Why don't you forward that punch list outside of the homes?
Well, that's Mr. Reynolds, he has that. I don't have the final list.
Chris, do you have that? Do you have that? Could you forward that to Ken at the planning office so that we could have a look? Okay, so we can look into that for you and see if we can help.
All right, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you, sir.
Excuse me. My name is Steve Costa. I live at 35 Bay Point Drive, right next door to the pump house. I just want to revisit something, make sure I had some clarification on the sidewalk that's going to go to Onset Avenue and timing of that. Is that after Phase 4? I know there's still some issues because of the street and all that kind of stuff, and I understand that's going to impact putting in a sidewalk, but do we have to wait until, let's say they get the approvals for Phase 4. Do we have to wait until Phase 4 is complete before we get a sidewalk to go to Onset Avenue?
I don't believe that's gonna be the case. That's why I brought that up earlier in the meeting, that we'd like to see that pushed up to the top of the to-do list.
Okay.
And Mr. Fay's response was, if the project is approved.
So when it's at the top of the to-do list, Does that mean the completion of Phase 4?
No.
That it would be done?
No.
It's got to have a date stamped on it prior to that.
A date specific, I think, would be difficult.
Well, June 30th, that was my next question. That's the sidewalk within Phase 1.
No. Right.
Right.
I think it's a case of, again, if the project is approved,
Okay.
they close the property, they redefine the street. At that point, they can determine where the sidewalk goes, and then at that point, it could be constructed.
The reconstruction of Bay Point from Onset Avenue to in front of the clubhouse was originally a part of Phase 1. It was moved to Phases 2 and 3 at the request of Bay Point because they anticipated using that as the entrance for Phases 2 and 3 and did
Construction.
not want to ruin a brand-new pavement if they completed it during Phase 1. So if you look at the modification of the special permit, it moved the reconstruction of that first phase into Phases 2 and 3. That's the way it sits today.
Those phases have been approved.
They have been approved, but as a part of the construction of Phases 2 and 3, that's where it sits. So unless you make changes in the special permit, the expectation is that at the close of Phases 2 and 3, Bay Point Drive would be finished.
At which point, the sidewalk would be in place.
That includes the sidewalk because that was part of the plan.
Okay. So I guess Charlie, in his explanation.
Has put a time frame around it,
has
which
cla-
is-
Right, has
okay.
clarified that you won't be
So it
waiting till
Started
phase
in
4.
2016.
There is no time frame attached to it because it's a part of the approval. It's whenever it takes place. Now, there has been no change in the, if I'm correct, there's been no change in the security or the performance for that construction yet. I don't recall that in the performance security that you approved 2 or 3 weeks ago, that it included any of that work.
Any of the sidewalk work?
Anything to do with that first 1,300 feet of Bay Point Drive.
Okay.
I don't believe that was included.
I'll have to look back into that.
It wasn't there.
Right. So it's still a part of the approval that was granted the special permit modification for Phases 2 and 3. And it's expected that at the conclusion of 2 and 3, it would have to be done.
Okay.
That's my recollection.
And the sidewalk would be on the side where the pavilion is today, which is the
Yes,
left
that's-
side as you come in.
Yes, that's what it showed on the plan, right?
Okay, and that's what tie it into 2, 3, and 1.
Yes.
Okay. The
You
other,
want to comment? If,
The only
go
other
ahead.
clarification I was going to make is Mr. Fay said the sidewalk would probably be delivered in 2 phases.
right.
A binder phase,
sure,
and then
yeah,
a
yeah,
final phase.
just to keep people off the street, that's the,
yeah,
that's the big
I just
thing,
wanted to
because-
make sure the final, it would be
Right.
2 phases.
Right, that makes sense.
Well,
I
those
mean,
are
because
conditions
it's just
that-
too dangerous.
Right now, that's not been spelled out that way, Carl, so that if you want to make it that way, you'd have to specify it as a part of this modification.
Yeah, we could make the sidewalk a condition of approval on this, on the phase 4.
Well, you're modifying, if everything goes according to the way it's going right now, you're going to be modifying the special permit itself.
Yep.
That means at this point, the entire special permit is up for consideration, so that you could make the changes that you need to make, if you so choose, to when that first section of Bay Point Drive gets completed and when the sidewalk gets
Gets
put in.
put in. Okay, cool. All right.
Just one comment on that. Back in 2016, for Phase 1, that was called, excuse me, a condition of approval, item number 59. So that was 6 years ago. So sooner we can get it, the better, because there's lots more people.
Yeah, no, understandable. It is
Okay.
definitely a safety issue. I agree.
So, excuse me, the other thing is the lighting along the street. You talked about having X amount of streetlights, street corners, that sort of deal. And it was talked about that there is lighting on the street today, and it's all solar lights. And it's very dim solar lights, even after a bright day, okay? It's really not lighting, it barely lights the sidewalk near the driveways. So, because that's where most of them are posted if you go down the street. So Can we get something more efficient for lighting purposes? I mean, not, not by solar power, to try to lighten that up, because, again, we're gonna have a lot more people. There's a lot of people now, and they're walking in the streets, especially when they go around the corner, and then they're hitting, the golfers coming in, et cetera. And is there a condition somewhere as far as markings for crossing the street for the golf carts? Because there are no markings, and those guys and, the golfers, they come out from every direction. And so people come down the street, all of a sudden somebody pops in front of you. Because there's no, like just a crosswalk to say this is where you should be, or a sign to tell the golfer, stop or something. It's tough when there is a lot of traffic that goes up and down the street. I live in the first house that you have to pass to get into the development. So, being retired, I see a lot of traffic, because I'm there all day. So, and it's only gonna get more, that's where I'm coming from, and it's a safety issue.
All right, I appreciate that. That's definitely what I'm hearing is safety,
Okay.
Sidewalks, lighting, and golf cart crossings, it all
Yeah,
boils down to
it
safety.
gets scary sometimes.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
No problem. Thank you. Is there anybody else that would like to comment?
Hi, my name is David McPhee, and I was here last November, so I won't rehash anything.
Appreciate that.
I'll just get right to the point. We have a new landscaping company this year, and we had told them that we've had problems with the irrigation. It's just not working. They have told us we have major issues with the irrigation. It's just another thing that's gone wrong for Phase 1. So,
It could, let me ask you a question, is that item detail on the list that Chris Reynolds has?
no, this is brand new, we just found out.
Okay, so maybe we
They
could
were
add-
going to turn on the irrigation, and
Okay, just, I mean,
found- it's just-
again.
we'll add it to it, how's that?
We're trying to, we'll try to limit tonight's
Yep, I'm
conversation.
gonna be
to-
quick.
Okay.
So, what my wife and I would like, and the Wynwood Pine homeowners and the Bay Point Village homeowners, before you give out any permits for the 120 units, which is 36 more than what we were told at the beginning, just come down and see Wynwood Pines. Talk to the people. See what it looks like. It's been 3 years now. See what it looks like. Look at the homes, the landscaping, the sidewalks. Take a tour of the homes. You can come see my home, and I'll show you some of the mistakes. But all this talk is fine tonight. The plans, the engineers. You have to do it right. That's the issue. Make it right. Phase 1 was not done right, and all the homeowners are paying for it. So that's all. You want it right, right? That's all we want. If you want to move on to Phase 2, 3, 4, whatever, just keep an eye on them and make sure it's right. That's all we're asking.
All right, very good. I have been through the neighborhood quite a few times too, by the way. You ever see this enormous blue pickup truck riding through, that's me, you can
I'll
wave.
stop you next time, all right?
Is there anybody else? I was just gonna ask if there was someone on Zoom.
Hi, I'm Tony Cesanaro, 2 JD Court. And in addition to what everybody else has said, I heard Mr. Fay say that by the end of June, the sidewalks and will be completed. And right now, we would request that be a contingency based on approval of Phase 4. Because right now, the sidewalks are not, they're a mess. And whatever you call it, between the sidewalk and the street, where there's supposed to be grass or other things planted, there's nothing there. It's just a mess. And it all flows out onto the street. So we would just respectfully request if there could be a contingency that Phase 4 approval is contingent on completing the sidewalks and the lighting for Phase 1. That's all.
Okay, thank you very much, appreciate the input.
Hello, my name is Al Pickett. Earlier you were talking about putting the cuts in on the sidewalks, and what I would suggest is when you put those cuts in, you're gonna have to put the little tabs in for the blind, because you're changing the level. And that's all I have to say.
Okay, well, that's a good suggestion. Thank you very much. We definitely don't want anybody getting hurt.
Hi, I'm Paula Shiner. I live at 46 Cahoon in Phase 1. And in addition to all of the safety concerns and everything that everyone has said, I'd like to add drainage issues to the list. I don't think they're on the punch list. I know we've had a lot of conversation this evening about drainage and concerns for drainage. We've got some major issues that still need to be dealt with.
Okay, very good.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Joan Guerrero.
Yeah,
at
please,
1
wait.
Jetty Court.
If you could just repeat, yeah,
Okay.
repeat.
Joan
your-
Guerrero, 1 Jetty Court.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure those sidewalks are done appropriately. I do have a husband who is unsteady and is handicapped. Right now, he can't use the sidewalks because they're not completed. They're all on level. So if you could make that a condition that they would be done in June, he would muchly and myself appreciate, because we're walking in the street.
Okay, thank you.
I'm also a physical therapist.
Oh. Is there anybody on Zoom? Is there anybody on Zoom that would like to comment? Please raise your hand.
Give it a few seconds, but it takes a little bit to get it.
And, okay. Okay, so with that, I'm not gonna close public comment. I think we'll leave it open until, the May 9th meeting. So we will vote to continue the public hearing until May 9th, 2022. Do I
Mr.
have?
Chairman, before we take that vote, through you to Mr. Buckland, can we make a formal request to the conservation, or your date, Mr. Pichette? I don't know what his title is. We need section 1551, the letter from the Conservation Commission, the determination.
Right, I made that request to him.
Can you?
Thank you. So could we get it by the 9th? That
I
would
was saying,
be
can we
nice.
have it prior to the meeting?
It's possible. They have a meeting on Wednesday, so,
Well, I mean, it's gonna adversely affect the applicant if we don't have it by the 9th.
right.
Yeah, we can't close the public hearing, right, until we get that.
You could make it contingent. You don't have to hold the public hearing open for a note from the Conservation Commission unless there's changes that are made as a result of the Conservation Commission.
But it will affect how we view the project and how we vote if we
But
don't
we
have
won't
it.
be able to vote until we have that.
Right,
Yeah, that's reasonable not to vote until you have it in hand.
yeah.
Can I just ask the question, is the applicant expected to go to the Conservation Commission for this?
No.
Because quite frankly,
No.
okay, so this is something you guys are gonna look at.
Well,
It's an internal request from another.
In this case, because you didn't file an NOI and you didn't need to, we
That's
still
correct.
need the Conservation Commission to say, you didn't need to, you didn't, and they're okay with that.
Okay, yeah, because I just wanted to reiterate the fact that we do know that we're not within 100 feet of any
Right.
wetlands.
Yep.
And we just
Right,
need,
and that's, that information you want to get to the Conservation Administrator as well. It's your responsibility for being in conformance with the zoning bylaw. So the zoning bylaw says that the Conservation Commission has to make a finding on the property, on the development, before the planning board can vote approval or not.
Okay, but you're gonna ask them that question and they'll
The
respond?
question's already been asked to them, yeah.
Okay,
it wouldn't hurt for you to just file a statement with Mr. Pichette.
okay, I just wanted to make sure where this was coming from, that's
Yep.
all.
Right.
Okay, so, having heard everyone that wants to be heard, I would entertain a motion to continue the public hearing to the planning board meeting of May 9, 2022.
So moved. You could give it to Jane.
I'll give it to Jane. Motion by Jane Gleason, seconded by Sam Corbett. Take a vote. Mike Teast. Gleason? Sam Corbett? Al Schultz?
Aye.
Chair votes aye, 5-0-0.
And you just need to get Mr. Fay to sign. Mr. Fay, you're okay with that continuance, right?